Canada, long celebrated as a welcoming nation, is experiencing a shift in public sentiment toward immigration. More Canadians are now expressing reservations about high levels of immigration, raising the question, why does Canada, a country built by immigrants, seem less eager to welcome newcomers? For much of its history, Canada has relied on immigration to drive economic growth. After World War II, the country opened its doors to millions of immigrants who played a crucial role in rebuilding the economy. In 1971, Canada became the first country in the world to adopt multiculturalism as an official policy, reinforcing its commitment to diversity. This approach attracted skilled workers, entrepreneurs, and refugees from around the globe, helping Canada grow into a diverse and prosperous nation. Today, Canada continues to have some of the highest immigration levels in the world on a per capita basis. In 2023, Canada welcomed over 460,000 new permanent residents, aiming to address labor shortages and support economic growth. However, polls suggest that public opinion is shifting. A 2022 survey by the Environics Institute found that 39% of Canadians believe the country is accepting too many immigrants, up from 33% in 2019. This change in sentiment reflects growing economic and other concerns among Canadians. One of the most pressing economic issues is the housing crisis. In cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, where most immigrants settle, housing prices have skyrocketed. The average home price in Toronto exceeded $1.2 million in 2022, an increase of over 30% in just a few years. In Vancouver, prices have more than doubled in the past decade. This has made home ownership nearly unattainable for many Canadians, particularly younger generations. While immigration is not the sole cause of rising housing costs, other factors like limited housing supply, low interest rates, and speculative investments are also at play. Many Canadians perceive that the influx of new residents is worsening the problem. A study by the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, reported that between 2014 and 2020, the average annual increase in housing demand in Canada was around 230,000 units, with a substantial portion of this driven by immigration. It also found that for every 100,000 immigrants, housing demand increases by 32,000 units. This increased demand, coupled with insufficient supply, is driving prices even higher. This demand-supply imbalance has led to significant competition for housing, with bidding wars becoming common in many urban markets. In 1980, Canada's GDP per capita was $17,000 per annum, while the median house price was $76,000. However, by 2023, the situation has changed greatly, where GDP per capita has increased to $56,000 per annum. However, in contrast, the median house price has risen to $720,000. The rental market is also under significant strain. With home ownership out of reach for many, both Canadian-born residents and immigrants turn to the rental market, further increasing demand. In Toronto, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment exceeded $2,500 per month in 2023, a 20% increase from the previous year. In Vancouver, the average rent for a one-bedroom was over $3,000 per month. This is presenting another alarming challenge. Today, up to 35,000 people are homeless on any given night in Canada. These numbers have risen in tandem with housing costs, particularly in urban centers where housing demand is highest. In Toronto, the number of people using homeless shelters rose by 15% between 2016 and 2021. Vancouver saw a similar trend, with homelessness increasing by 30% between 2014 and 2021. These increases reflect the inability of many to afford housing in these expensive cities. The labor market is another area of concern. While immigrants have historically filled labor shortages in key sectors such as healthcare, technology, and construction, there is a growing perception that they are also contributing to job competition, particularly in low-skilled positions. Immigrants have contributed significantly to the labor force. Between 2010 and 2020, immigrants accounted for more than 80% of Canada's labor force growth. The COVID-19 pandemic, which led to widespread job losses, has heightened these concerns. In 2020, the unemployment rate in Canada peaked at 13.7%, the highest level since the Great Depression. Many Canadians worry that in an already challenging job market, an influx of new workers could make it harder for them to find stable employment. Although the unemployment rate has since fallen to 5%, fears about job competition persist, especially among younger workers. Another cause of concern is the wage stagnation. Between 2000 and 2020, real wage growth in Canada was relatively slow, particularly in lower-paying sectors. For example, from 2010 to 2020, the median hourly wage for workers in Canada increased by only only 2% annually, barely keeping pace with inflation. The influx of immigrants has a more pronounced impact on low-skilled Canadian-born workers. A study by the Fraser Institute in 2016 found that for every 10% increase in the immigrant population, wages for Canadian-born workers without a high school diploma decreased by 4%. This effect is more noticeable in regions with high concentrations of new immigrants. Income inequality has also been rising in Canada, fueling frustration and resentment. Since the 1980s, the wealth gap between the richest and poorest Canadians has grown steadily. In 1980, the top 10% of income earners accounted for 24% of the country's total income. By 2018, that share had risen to 34%. Many Canadians feel left behind by economic growth and are concerned that immigration might exacerbate these inequalities. For example, a report by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives found that recent immigrants earn, on average, 30% less than Canadian-born workers. This wage gap can contribute to economic inequality and strain public services, fueling resentment among those who feel they are competing for the same resources. The cost of living in Canada has become a significant concern, with many attributing the rising expenses to the influx of immigrants. As immigration impacts both direct and indirect effects on various components of the cost of living, such as housing, wages, and demand for goods and services. Housing costs are a central issue, with home ownership requiring about 60% of household income on average. In cities like Vancouver, this figure skyrockets to 98%, and in Toronto, it's around 80%, leading to a substantial financial burden on both newcomers and existing residents. When it comes to healthcare, the Canadian Institute for Health Information reported that in 2021, healthcare spending per capita was CAD $7,800, so the increasing immigration would strain public healthcare resources. Besides immigration, there has been a notable increase in the number of international students in Canada, which today stands at 900,000. Combined with immigration, the large student intake has contributed to inflation, and everyday expenses, including food, utilities, and transportation, have seen steady increases. This combination of factors, skyrocketing housing costs, increased financial requirements for students, and rising daily expenses, has fueled concerns about the impact of immigration on the cost of living in Canada, contributing to the growing sentiment against increased immigration levels. These economic challenges are leading many Canadians to view immigration as a contributor to their financial struggles. A 2022 Angus Reid poll found that 49% of Canadians felt that immigration was having a negative impact on housing affordability, while 31% believed it was making it harder for them to find well-paying jobs. Another poll by Ledger in 2023 showed that 44% of Canadians wanted the federal government to reduce immigration levels due to concerns about the cost of living. Cultural anxieties are also playing a role in shaping public attitudes. Canada's multicultural identity is celebrated by many, but it has also led to fears about the erosion of traditional cultural norms. These cultural concerns often intersect with economic fears, creating a potent opposition to immigration. For instance, some Canadians worry that the rapid pace of demographic change, particularly in urban centers, is contributing to a sense of cultural dislocation. As of 2021, about 23% of Canada's population is foreign-born, up from 21% in 2016. In Toronto, immigrants now make up nearly 50% of the population, compared to 29% in 1981. Furthermore, in cities with high immigrant populations, there is often a more pronounced presence of diverse cultural festivals and events. For instance, Toronto's Carabana and Vancouver's Chinese New Year celebrations highlight the multicultural makeup, which some native residents view as overshadowing traditional Canadian holidays. This rapid change is exacerbating insecurities and is fueling opposition to immigration. The role of the media, especially social media, in shaping public perceptions cannot be overlooked. While traditional media outlets generally strive for balanced reporting, social media platforms often amplify extreme views and misinformation. Algorithms designed to prioritize content that generate strong emotional responses tend to promote posts that evoke fear or anger. Misleading stories about immigrants disproportionately benefiting from public services or causing economic harm are shared widely, influencing public perception even when these stories are factually incorrect. Despite these challenges, many voices in Canada continue to emphasize the positive economic contributions of immigration. Immigrants are essential to sustaining Canada's economic growth, especially considering an aging population and declining birth rates. A report by the Conference Board of Canada found that without immigration, Canada's labor force would shrink by 20% over the next 20 years. Immigrants also contribute to innovation and entrepreneurship. According to Statistics Canada, immigrants are more likely than Canadian-born individuals to start their own businesses. These contributions are vital to the long-term health of the economy. However, the growing reluctance to embrace immigration reflects broader anxieties about economic security and the future of the Canadian economy. If public sentiment continues to shift against immigration, it could lead to more restrictive policies that undermine Canada's economic prospects. Increased polarization around the issue of immigration could also threaten social cohesion, leading to deeper divisions within Canadian society. In conclusion, the question of whether Canada truly does not want immigrants now is deeply tied to economic concerns that have been exacerbated by recent challenges. While Canada has long benefited from immigration, public sentiment is increasingly shaped by fears about housing affordability, job security, and economic inequality. To address these concerns, it will be crucial for policymakers to engage in open, fact-based discussions about the role of immigration in Canada's economy and to implement policies that address the root causes of economic insecurity. By doing so, Canada can continue to be a place of opportunity and inclusivity for all residents, ensuring that immigration remains a cornerstone of the nation's success rather than a source of division.